Our mission is towards a zero carbon future. And one of our most common mottos is reduce what you can, offset what you can't. And so, with this in mind, we are both an education nonprofit and a leading carbon offset retailer. And so, we educate individuals and businesses generally about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, on ways to reduce their emissions, on ways to calculate their carbon footprint, and on how projects are developed.
So yes, yet another conversation around the theme of transitioning towards a zero carbon economy is coming up. Hello and a warm welcome. This is the Mission Shunya podcast. For all the new listeners, a quick note. Shunya means zero in the native Indian language, and this podcast and all the activities offline and online across Mission Shunya platforms will cover the stories related to this global transition towards a zero carbon economy. So feel free to sign up and show your support. You can follow us across the social media channels or subscribe to the podcast. So just check the webpage missionshunya.com to find all the blog post, audio and video content related to it. Our guest on this show is from Carbon Fund, and as you heard in the brief intro, the organization aims to help people and businesses get to their net zero targets. We will find out more about their work through this conversation. And just want to remind you that you have a simple action item towards the end of the show shared by our guest, so hope you find it easy to act upon. So with that, let's jump right into our feature segment. Hello Brian, welcome to the Mission Shunya podcast. So Brian, can you begin by saying the origins of Carbon Fund and how did it get started?
Absolutely. And thank you very much for the opportunity. I certainly appreciate the chance to share our story. So my name is Brian McFarland. I work at an organization called carbonfund.org Foundation. We were founded back in September 2003. As a US-based 501c3 not-for-profit. And we were originally based outside of Washington, D.C., in the Maryland suburb of Silver Spring. And we were started in large part to help democratize emission reductions, where any individual, small company, or large business for that matter, could directly support greenhouse gas emission reduction projects. And I joined shortly after the founding as an intern back in 2007, where I was largely responsible for sort of classic intern tasks like faxing and filing and responding to info emails. And then slowly over time, I'd started graduate school. I was promoted a handful of times, and now I'm the senior vice president of carbonfund.org's project portfolio and our project origination.
That's fantastic. It's good to know about the company in brief and also about your journey. And that's a phenomenal journey, I should say, getting right from an internship to this position. Now, you did mention briefly about the origins, but what is the core mission of the organization?
Yeah, so our mission is towards a zero carbon future. And one of our most common mottos is reduce what you can, offset what you can't. And so with this in mind, we are both an education nonprofit and a leading carbon offset retailer. And so we educate individuals and businesses generally about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, on ways to reduce their emissions, on ways to calculate their carbon footprint, and on how projects are developed. And then ultimately, ideally, these individuals and businesses will choose to donate to carbonfund.org, and then we purchase on their behalf certified carbon offset credits in the energy efficiency, renewable energy, and forestry sectors. And I guess just to take a quick step back, for those of your audience who are unfamiliar with a carbon offset, a carbon offset is simply a reduction equivalent to 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions from a project. So it could be a wind project, a solar project, a reforestation project, a clean cook stove project, and they're all ultimately going through a series of audits to issue these carbon offset credits. And now to date, we have at carbonfund.org worked with, I would say, approximately 800,000 individual supporters and more than 3,000 business partners, the majority of whom are honestly small to medium businesses. But we have partnered over the years with many large, familiar companies like Samsung, Dell, and Volkswagen. And collectively, with all their support, we have funded more than 200 carbon reduction, renewable energy certificate, and tree planting projects around the world, including several wind, solar, and small scale run of river hydroelectric projects in India. And then back in 2010 to 2011, we founded our wholly owned subsidiary, Carbon Co., which is where I primarily work and where I lead both our consulting engagements and our project development services. And so for Carbon Co., to date, we have financed, designed, and now advise on the ongoing implementation of four. The acronym is REDD, R-E-D-D, which stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. So we've supported four of these REDD projects in the state of Acre, Brazil, which are conserving approximately 300,000 hectares of lowland tropical rainforests in the Amazon rainforest, while providing habitat for a tremendous amount of biodiversity from monkeys to jaguars. And in the process, we're also helping, I'd say, more than 2,000 local community members with a wide variety of local initiatives. And then also along this journey, carbonfund.org has also acquired Camp Quinabarge, which is a traditional co-ed summer camp in New Hampshire. And we've also developed a carbon-free product certification program where products undergo an independent life cycle assessment and then commit to offsetting the product's lifetime emissions.
That's wonderful, and it provides us a good summary and good overview of what are the different kind of projects that you have done in a small nutshell, if I were to put it that way. And you did mention about the amount of businesses and the individuals who have been benefited by carbonfund.org's work. Now, if we were to go by, like, say, a short step-by-step process of how a typical carbon offset program works for an individual and an organization, what would you say? Because I know a lot of people who hear of carbon offsets generally know that it's just offsetting what people can't save, or just as you mentioned earlier, like, I can't control my emissions, so I just offset it by doing something. But as a company, as an organization, how do you go about it in a step-by-step process?
Sure. So it's a little different for the different organizations involved in our industry, but at carbonfund.org, in the past, individuals and small businesses could go visit our website at carbonfund.org and utilize our online carbon calculators to estimate either a portion of or the entire carbon footprint. And then these individuals and small businesses could choose a project category to support. So they could choose, let's say, energy efficiency or renewable energy or forestry. And now we have transitioned to preset options such as small car, medium car, or large car to help ultimately simplify the process. And these individuals, instead of choosing a category, now can choose specific projects to support. And for organizations, particularly medium to large businesses, we offer Excel-based workbooks to undertake more in-depth carbon calculations, such as the emissions attributable to an event, where, for example, the event organizer could insert in this workbook the number of attendees, the number of flights, the number of hotel nights, whether meals are being served, and then can offset all the emissions associated with those various activities.
That's nice. Now, just to add on to what you mentioned, you did mention about the calculation steps and the process. But the crucial part, I would like to know, like, how do you review the success of a program? Do you have a mechanism in place to review the progress? Because it might be different for an individual compared to an organization.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of sort of analyzing success, and I would say the greatest success story so far over this journey has been Carbon Co. being founded to develop RED projects. And again, RED stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. They are essentially a forest carbon offset project that avoids deforestation. And in Acre, Brazil, which is the farthest western state in Brazil, bordering Peru and Bolivia, we now have 4 projects. As I mentioned earlier, they're totaling about 300,000 hectares and benefiting about 2,000 local community members while preserving an extraordinary amount of terrestrial biodiversity. And these projects, on one level, have successfully passed 19 independent validation and verification audits to 2 of the leading standards in our industry, known as the Verified Carbon Standard, or VCS, as well as the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standards, known as CCB. And in addition, all 4 of these projects have achieved gold level distinction to the CCB standard for exceptional biodiversity, community, and or climate adaptation benefits. And what's been a great success is that, over time, I've gone to the projects on average, I'd say about 3 to 4 times a year, spending about 2 to 3 weeks on each trip. And I've been able to see the progress over time where there's, quote, real activities happening on the ground. And so with respect to the local communities, we have been implementing a wide range of local projects and programs, from building health clinics and community bathrooms, teaching proper hand washing techniques and distributing mosquito nets, facilitating visits by doctors, nurses, and dentists. We've been renovating schools. We've been donating school supplies. We're in the process, just starting off, of granting land titles to local community members to help strengthen their land tenure rights. And we've hired agronomists to teach more sustainable forms of agriculture to the local community members.
That's a good success story, if I were to say, because generally when we hear about Brazil, we hear the negative side of it. But good to know a successful project of this scale is actually happening in Brazil and in that region. That's phenomenal.
Thanks. I mean, a lot more needs to be done. There is still, sadly, a lot of forest fires, a lot of deforestation, illegal deforestation in Brazil. Brazil had an incredible success story where over the course of, say, a decade, the deforestation rates had drastically reduced. And now, sadly, they're starting to turn back upwards. And it's disheartening. I mean, there's a lot of local community members and indigenous people who are dependent on the forests. As I mentioned several times, there's a tremendous amount of terrestrial biodiversity, which is really what got me into the whole environmental field. I grew up on a little pond catching snakes and turtles and frogs. And there's simply no place on Earth than the Amazon rainforest with that amount of terrestrial biodiversity.
True. That's well said. Brian, before I get to my next question on the awareness campaigns, just wanted to quickly check, do you have any strategic partnerships with other organizations of repute, or do you collaborate with any other global organizations?
Yeah, we collaborate with a lot of different organizations. So carbonfund.org primarily purchases offsets from organizations that have developed projects. So we have, as I mentioned, we've supported about 200 different projects all around the world, from wind and solar projects in India to small-scale hydroelectric projects in Honduras to wind projects in Texas and livestock methane projects in California and landfill gas energy projects in the state of Massachusetts. And so all these different projects are developed by a whole wide range of actors. And then at Carbon Co., we have partnered with 3 main entities, I would say. One would be the local communities. 2 would be the private landowners. And 3 is an organization called Carbon Securities that helps me with all the translations, interpretations, goes on all the site visits with me. And we've also got a great cast of various contractors. So I work with a few technical forestry firms known as Terra Carbon and Australia Conservation. There's a few phenomenal local biologists who help me to design and then implement the biodiversity impact monitoring plans. And there's a wide range of other local nonprofits, local government or federal government agencies that are either directly or indirectly assisting us with our projects.
Just to follow up on the same question, because you mentioned a range of partners, and considering that you've been in the space for quite a long time and working on the same mechanism, same set of projects, how has the development been in this time?
Well, development's always challenging. There's a long time frame to get through these independent validation and verification audits. Projects, depending on the project type, are relatively expensive. It could involve, literally building out solar or wind power plants. It could involve sort of large scale restoration, reforestation activities. The project documents need to be written in accordance with a certification standard and follow all the technical guidance of the methodologies or protocols. And that can be challenging. And then all of this is under COVID-19 right now that makes travel difficult. We, particularly at our project in Brazil, don't want to spread the virus to the local communities who, fortunately, so far there have been no reported cases at our project sites. But I'd feel awful whether it's me or one of my technical contractors or a local contractor from the city to go visit the communities and then spread COVID-19. And a lot of these communities live in relatively close quarters, and it could very quickly spread, especially when there's multiple generations living together in the same household. So it's been difficult, but on a positive note, our projects are going well. It seems like our donations are still going well, and there's a lot of individuals and businesses and large businesses that have committed to supporting these natural climate solutions like RED projects and restoration projects. So I'm hopeful that at some point we will sort of get past COVID-19 and we'll see just that much more demand for these types of projects and those many more projects being developed.
Well, I can totally understand how under the current scenario, it's really tough at all levels. And glad that you're being very considerate, and good to know that the projects actually are happening, because a lot of projects from around the world, especially in clean tech, have slowed down just like any other sector. Now, Brian, getting back to the other activity that you do, you did mention that you run a lot of campaigns, particularly awareness campaigns. So what is the scale of these campaigns, and what is the net outcome of these campaigns? How has it been over the years?
Yeah, so it's gone very well over the years. As I mentioned earlier, like we partnered with, I'd say, about 800,000 to 850,000 individual supporters and more than 3,000 business partners. Sort of variety of different campaigns. So on one hand, my colleagues work directly with individuals and businesses on their sustainability plans and helping them to think through where their emissions are coming from and how to actually go about calculating those emissions and how to manage those emissions and how you can go about offsetting some of those emissions. How do you choose good projects? How do the projects get developed? Sort of that sort of thing. Another awareness campaign I would say is through the summer camp that carbonfund.org purchased years ago called Camp Quinnibarge. Camp Quinnibarge ultimately helps expose children to the great outdoors, from hiking in the forest to swimming in the nearby lake. And for some children, this is literally the first time they've ever swam in a lake as opposed to a swimming pool or having no opportunity to swim whatsoever. And for myself, again, I work more on our project origination and our project portfolio side of things. And I give a lot of presentations, particularly to graduate students, and I write a lot, such as scholarly journals. And I've actually got my third book in production as we speak. And these are focused on conservation finance and the strategies for the protection of both tropical rainforests and coral reefs. And then carbonfund.org also undertakes a lot of the, I guess you'd say, sort of more traditional campaigns, such as using social media channels like Facebook, LinkedIn, writing blogs, and sending out regular newsletters.
That's nice. And good to know that you are writing a third book, and we'll be happy to send the link across once it's done.
Thank you. That's nice. I appreciate that.
Just a follow up on that. How's the impact been? Like, do you see new organizations join carbonfund.org and get started? Do you see an influx of organizations who are saying, like, I want to do this, and they join your campaign?
Yeah, we've had a lot, fortunately, of donors who have stuck with us throughout COVID-19, throughout the recession back in 2008. And they've stuck with us over the last decade plus, which is fantastic. And then we each year add new and new donors who could represent an organization, or they could be doing it on their own as an individual. And not that they've necessarily partnered with carbonfund.org or our subsidiary Carbon Co., but you're starting to see a lot of big companies announce multi-$100 million commitments to natural capital solutions. And this includes companies like Shell and Total and BP and Microsoft. So I'm very encouraged that not only these large businesses are starting to become interested in the voluntary carbon markets, but there is this increasing uptick of interest from individuals and smaller businesses as well.
That's true. Recent announcements by the big corporations is generally very encouraging in that front. So, Brian, on a final note, towards the end of each episode, I kind of give an action item to the listeners, and probably what at an individual level can people do. And since carbonfund.org also has a calculator on its website, so what would your recommendation be? How can individuals get started? At least thinking in the line of, like, okay, I have to offset, I can do this, I can live a little bit of a sustainable lifestyle. How can they get started with that? What's your suggestion?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I would say, again, as I mentioned previously, our motto is reduce what you can, offset what you can't. And so we encourage individuals to reduce their emissions first, which not only reduces emissions, but oftentimes these reductions save people money. So, for example, this could be more regularly turning off lights when not in use to reduce your electric bill and the associated emissions with the electricity generation. It could be taking fewer car trips, taking more public transportation, more bike rides, more walks. And so, again, ultimately, individuals should look to reduce their own emissions first. And we have a lot of useful tips on our website. And as I mentioned, we work with a lot of individuals, whether on a one-on-one basis or through their companies. And then finally, we have a very simple, user-friendly website and a checkout process to encourage individuals to offset their residual emissions that they're unable to reduce.
That's wonderful. I'll definitely put the link to the website and all the resources that you mentioned on the show notes section of this episode and also on the website. So, Brian, it's been a wonderful chat, wonderful to know about carbonfund.org and all the activities that you've been doing. Thanks for taking time to join me on the podcast.
Thank you very much for the kind words. I really appreciate it and look forward to keeping in touch. And thanks again to your listeners.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. It was quite interesting to know the significance of the REDD projects in Amazon rainforest in the global carbon mitigation strategies. In fact, if you are a regular listener, you would probably remember that sometime last year I had a special guest who spoke about the significance of Amazon rainforest. You can check that out in our podcast archive. And of course, you can connect with Brian and know more about Carbon Fund. You can visit their website carbonfund.org. The links, as usual, will be in the show notes section of the podcast and also on the webpage. So come back again in 2 weeks' time. You'll have yet another conversation covering the story towards this transition towards a zero carbon economy. With that, signing off, this is Girish Shivakumar, and as always, thank you for listening.